About a week ago now, Skyrim got what is functionally a $20 DLC. That with Skyrim Anniversary Edition, which added in 26 totally new pieces of content to Skyrim, and then also all of the old Creation Club stuff. But in this video, I'm really just focusing on this new content that just got added in, as I have now played through literally all of it. And I want to go over what each of these new quests, each of these new features are, and kind of just give my thoughts and impressions, a bit of a review of that new content in general. I've already covered all of the old content because it came out in Creation Club, so I basically have reviewed all of that already. And for those of you wondering, well, how much content is actually here? There's a ton. Just for the new content itself, the newly added Creation Club content with Anniversary Edition, it took me about 10 hours to actually play through all of it. And that's a lot, considering it's not even everything, and there's still a whole wealth of other Creation Club content this added in. So if you're wondering if it was worth the $20 from a gameplay time perspective, I would definitely say yes. You could probably get an easy 20 hours of gameplay out of the new stuff. Okay, but before we get into that, I have to tell you about today's video sponsor, and with this one in particular. There's a lot of you out there. I know you're going to really like it. I can see those video demographics. You're going to want this one. And what we're talking about today is Exter. And these guys are the cross-section of technology and wallets. And these wallets are pretty cool. Of course, they're thin and sleek like many other wallets out there, but they're also smart. They have this card mechanism on one side to easily push out and get quick access to all of the cards in the wallet. It's a huge issue I've had in the past, but they also offer you this perfect little tiny smart tracker. It fits nice and seamlessly inside of the wallet because it's so freaking thin. Using the app, you could see its exact location and then actually make it play a ringing sound. Or alternatively, if you lost your phone, you could technically use your smart tracker to find your phone also. And if you really want to feel like you're living in the future, you could even have it go off based off voice commands. Hey Siri, ring my wallet. And to make sure it never dies, it even has a built-in solar panel. All of this to hopefully make sure neither your wallet nor your identity ever get stolen. So if you want to check out anything I just talked about or any of their other products, you can click on my link in the video description and even just help support the channel. But looking back at Skyrim, I first want to take a look at some of the bigger things added with this. And one of the first ones is the Cause. This being one of the meatier kind of DLC-sized experiences added in with this. So the Cause is going to pull heavy on the nostalgia. That's kind of the theme and design of this one. It took me about an hour to complete all of the quests, but then you are left with some other content to continue experiencing. And the principal concept here is that the Mythic Dawn from Oblivion have returned to Skyrim and are attempting to open an Oblivion gate in Skyrim. And right off the bat, if you're a huge Oblivion fan, you'll probably really enjoy this one. You're going to go back through Riel. This is one of the coolest dungeons they added in with Creation Club. It really had just a unique design and nice layout overall. The tile set they're using for these walls and structures are actually going to be a modder's resource after this, so you might see other mods actually using this, which is really cool. And basically the gist of this is you're following in the footsteps of this Mythic Dawn expedition who went through Riel. And without getting hyper specific, throughout the dungeon, as you probably saw in some of those trailers, you'll face off against some unique enemies with a nice large fight towards the end of the dungeon overall, all along the way collecting clues and the next note as to where you're supposed to go next. But after that, you'll be able to disguise yourself and actually go into the Mythic Dawn camp. You throw on their robes and get to walk through all peacefully. And it's kind of interesting because it's like this massive sprawling space with a ton of different rooms, a ton of members all throughout, and that main hall is a really cool location. But the whole reason you're here is literally to just take down this one guy and then fight a bunch of other Mythic Dawn members. Creation Club doesn't have voice acting because if they were to voice act one of the creations, they would have to translate that to a bunch of different languages, which is a lot of work, and they don't do that. So unfortunately, even though there are a bunch of people, there's not really anything to say or do with them. They're just kind of there and you'll fight them. And then following this, you actually do have the ability to access an Oblivion gate for yourself. And the moment after using the gate is pretty cool. Definitely the most impactful moment of this. You'll be taken back to a very familiar place, and the landscape here just looked awesome. It really all came together. You'll be able to wander around a bit. There's going to be two main enemies. That's where the quest will direct you, as well as a bunch of other miscellaneous enemies scattered throughout. And upon taking down all of those enemies, you'll get a couple of rewards and prizes. But otherwise, that's largely the quest. One of the pretty cool things you're left with is this conjurable Daedric horse. I really like the design on this one. Obviously, there's a plethora of horse mods out there, even other Creation Club content adding in horses, but I think this guy looks cool. You'll get Scourge, which appeared in past games. It carries over the same design, just more modernized, and overall looks pretty cool. It's a nice little mace for you to use. You get this cool staff with a name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, but it's pretty powerful. It'll deal shock damage and actually drain staminas from enemies, and overall, the design is nice. And lastly, but what is definitely my favorite of the goodies you're left with is is Torment, which matches of course really well with a set of Daedric armor, or even that style, which I think a lot of people go towards. It'll set enemies ablaze in combat, and then you can deal bonus damage to enemies while they are on fire. Overall with the cause, it's one of those ones that just has so much more potential. It feels like they were really trying to do a full DLC here, and it kind of has all of the stuff to be a cool DLC, but then when it comes to the questing and the actual outside of combat content, it just completely falls short. Like the fact that you walk through this Mythic Dawn base that looks awesome, and there's all these people around, except nobody has anything to say, just kind of felt silly. And even with your experience going through the Oblivion Gate, it did feel memorable and cool, but again, it just kind of felt like there could have been more to do than fight a bunch of people. You'll go to a bunch of cool places, you'll take on a bunch of unique and new enemies in Skyrim, but overall it was definitely far from my favorite thing in this batch of Creation Club releases. What was actually one of my favorite things in this batch of Creation Club releases was farming. This one was actually pretty simple. There's a short quest to actually acquire ownership of this farmstead. It's a bit sad with the lore, but ultimately pretty forgettable. And then from there, you're going to have this hyper interactive farming gameplay where you click and plant stuff, and then it tells you it was planted successfully. But basically the gist of this is you're going to unlock this farmstead, and there'll technically be quests for you to do, but it kind of opens up allowing you to really do what you want. You're going to hire a steward to actually manage the farm for you, and a big part of actually establishing it and adding more to it. There's also going to be a farming crafting table so you can craft upgrades for your farm and basically create new things around it. And you could even hire additional people to work on the farm to increase productivity. I like this one though because functionally it's just a player home with some cool features. Is farming a super viable aspect of Skyrim that everyone's going to love? Not necessarily. From a gameplay perspective, there really isn't that much going on, but I enjoy this one again because it's a house that I feel like I'm actually building. At one point I bought a bunch of animals. I actually upgraded the house that all of my farm helpers lived in. Well, technically they didn't even have a house before, so I gave them a house. You can buy a stable and buy a horse to stay there. You can build a bunch of apiaries so you get bees and bonuses from that. Every couple of days this farm will naturally generate resources and actually give you a bunch of gold. You go back to the steward to actually take that gold out, and this adds up pretty quickly. A fully upgraded farm will give you thousands every couple of days. Plus there's actually a bunch of upgrades you can make to the main house. You could add on a bunch to this, whether it be workshops or just making the bedroom look better and prettier. So it's a relatively simple one gameplay wise. It's not like these are fundamentally changing how you play Skyrim, but I think especially on a survival playthrough, this could be both practical in the sense that you have food generation, but also I just really loved it as a player home mod. It was definitely my favorite of the player home mods added in with this Creation Club batch overall. Then we have the two surprise releases with this batch of Creation Club items, and that is horse armor. So before the release, Bethesda actually announced 24 of the 26 things, and the two they didn't announce, and I guess it's kind of a joke, are the two free pieces of horse armor that came out. So even if you didn't buy the Anniversary Edition bundle or anything, you could actually download these for free right now. Technically they're on sale though, I'm not sure when that's going to come to an end, but it adds in two separate sets of horse armor. One of these is going to be steel, and the other one is going to be elven. Each of these can be bought at a stable for 500 gold, and then the stable hand himself will apply the horse armor to your horse, and you could switch back and forth, but you have to go to a stable to use this. It's not like the horse has its own inventory with an armor section now. They're pretty high detail. I think both of them look good enough. It's not like they look bad on the horse. The elven one in particular I think is really high quality and looks pretty nice depending on which horse you're using. It's kind of nice to have this just as a background feature easily integrated via stables already, although it was actually bugged and super bugged from my experience. As when fast traveling and even sometimes when just entering and exiting locations, the horse would just lose its armor. This is one of the first mods I tried out when actually doing this video, and over the next 7 to 8 hours of gameplay, this horse would just regularly not have armor on, then sometimes a few hours later it would have its armor back on. I don't know what the deal with that is, but yeah, definitely doesn't work 100%. So for that reason, I would probably use one of the many horse armor mods out there for free instead of this one. Then we do have the other larger piece of new content that came with this, that with Ghosts of the Tribunal. And this one is really nice. I definitely enjoyed it more than the cause. It's kind of like a weapon pack facilitated by a bunch of quests in between. The quest has a few different stages. I don't want to go super explicit on each of these, but more or less you start off by going to a Dwemer ruin. You find a mysterious cultist there who will attack you, and upon taking him out, hopefully, it'll immediately give you access to a bunch of new items. Some armor, a weapon, as well as an unenchanted sword that you will keep with you, and you'll definitely want to use this later. From there, you actually can put on that armor to go in and sneak into and discover a cult that is operating nearby. They have this big lavish location that you can explore, or actually if you don't want to disguise yourself, you technically could just immediately start fighting them. I decided to go the passive way instead though for more content, and from there you're going to actually talk to the cult leader and get a bunch bunch of different quests. So the way this works is, as it's pretty interesting here, this one actually did have some dialogue, but it was reusing voice lines from other NPCs. So you could talk to people and it did feel like you had dialogue choices, but this wasn't original dialogue. It was clearly being repurposed. But Ghost of the Tribunal definitely had the most dialogue out of anything added in with this one. Still relying on notes pretty heavily, but it did feel a bit better that this at least had some talking. The 3 tasks you'll have to do for the cult are tracking down a traitorous guard, investigating some missing items, and even dealing with some propaganda flyers. From there, you're going to have this epic fall and then a quest to rescue a cult member, and even a fight where you're defending the cult's base with some ordinators. One of the things I liked about this one was, even though all of these quests were pretty simple, they weren't getting super sophisticated or advanced or even heavy on lore, but it did really feel like you were progressing towards something. You were working towards gaining the trust of and joining the cult. Along the way, you would find these little gems that you would require as kind of a side objective to hopefully eventually enchant that unenchanted sword you found earlier. But in the end here, you're actually left with a ton of new content. After doing a bunch of the quests, you'll gain access to the cult's armory, which has the bulk of this new content. And even just during some of the quests when fighting enemies, you'll find some unique things here or there. So as far as what this will actually add in, you have 2 fully new and custom armor sets, the Indral armor and her hand armor. Each of these looking, of course, familiar if you've played past Elder Scrolls games, but also looking really good in Skyrim. Both of these are very high quality, and I could see people using these over some mod armors out there. It's going to be a preference thing, obviously, but I would use this on my character, and in fact, I did use this on my character for most of this playthrough. There's also a few one-off pieces you get. You get this helmet, you could actually get a Ordinator shield, which I think looks pretty cool, and then a bunch of the masks of the Tribunal, 4 in total. The design of these are pretty cool. There was the one that was kind of boring, but the 3 other ones I thought all looked very distinctive, very unique, and really stood out. They weren't necessarily the most powerful armor pieces in the game, but they really did have a quite profound and stylistic look. Now, whether or not it's a style you're going for, that is a different thing, but I thought they looked pretty cool. And even the Robes of the Lick, which is a nice artifact you get from doing the quest. But on the weapon side, you have a ton. 2 regular weapons that are just added in with an ebony mace and scimitar. Both of these look amazing. Again, I know that's probably getting a bit redundant at this point, how many times I'm saying that, but the quality of the content with this batch was really high. But then you also get a bunch of different artifacts. So with this, you will unlock the Cleaver of St. Felms, Hope's Fire, Light of Day, Magebane, Skull Crusher, and finally True Flame. While you're doing the main quest, you're going to have this side objective all throughout to find those gems, as I mentioned. When you actually get them all, you return to the Dwemer Forge and you could actually create True Flame. That process felt epic, and then to walk away with this cool sword as a result just made the whole thing feel very special. But overall, yeah, it's a bunch of artifacts that appeared in other Elder Scrolls games, now in Skyrim. They all look pretty good. They all have their own unique effects. I'm not going to dive into each and every one here. A lot of that stuff has fortunately been populated onto some of the wikis now. And overall, it's a fun one. I actually really enjoyed this because I went into it just expecting it to really be a weapon/armor pack, featuring swords and armors that you would like, but all the quests tying it together and even that process of getting True Flame elevated this one for me. It made it feel a bit more special and memorable overall, especially considering it almost felt like this had more substantial quest content than the Cause, but then also a ton of weapons and armors, where the Cause only had 3 weapons/armors. Then we have fishing, which was perhaps the most notable part of my 10 or so hours with all of this content, mainly because of how freaking long I spent fishing in Skyrim, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So also do a bunch of things, but at its core, it's going to add in fishing spots in Skyrim and fishes of all rarities, and even some fish you can only find during certain weathers in certain spots. The way to work is, once you actually get a fishing pole, which you just find this early on, you go to one of these bait locations, hit the E key, and then you are fishing. And then when you see some movement in the water, the reel being pulled, you hit the E key or the use key on your controller a second time, and then you'll pull the fish in. And you actually can get things that aren't fishes. There are a ton of valuable items you could find, and there's actually quite a few rare things you could find via this. But then also just an absolute massive amount of junk. The waters of Skyrim apparently are quite polluted. So the fishing side of this is kind of just a feature now in Skyrim. Whenever you're near the water and you see one of these buckets and they're scattered all across the map, you can just whip out your fishing rod and hopefully catch some food if you're playing on survival, or even find some items to sell, even some rare fishes you could sell. But there are also a ton of quests to do with this one. I mean a ton of quests. I spent more time on this Creation Club item than anything else in this video. There's 2 quest givers with this one, each having their own quest lines in a sense. And the way this will work is, most of the time what you're going to get is a list of fish that need to be caught somewhere, and then you have to go and find those fish. Or sometimes it's an item, sometimes it's a little bit different, like somebody's going to teach you fishing, or you're teaching somebody else fishing, or there's a fishing contest at one point. But the general gist is is naturally you're going to be going to places and trying to catch fish. And it's specifically designed so it'll take you all around Skyrim because certain fish can only be caught in certain places or during certain weather types. After completing some of these quests, you'll actually unlock specific fishing rods with certain bonuses, so it might specifically be good at catching large fish or small fish or actually getting certain items. You get this cool fishing outfit. A couple of the quests are unique, especially towards the end. You're going to unlock these 2 unique axes at a Dwemer ruin and even get a dwarven fishing rod for yourself. There's a giant crab boss fight, which, you know what, I'm not even going to explain anything more on this. If you get this far, you'll experience it and see what it is. And in the end, you could actually even help one of the quest givers set up her own fishing stall in Riften, which is pretty cool. Overall, fishing in Skyrim has way more content than I was expecting, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because all in all, this took me around 4 hours to play all of this, which sounds good, like wow, that is a lot of freaking time and a lot of content, but most of the content is literally just sitting there hitting the E key. Like, this was the process. You'd get a quest to be like, okay, you need fishes from the frozen lake. Then you have to find a map to find where that location is, and I keep looking at the map and it's like, okay, I'm in the right general area, but you spend 5-10 minutes sometimes running around in circles trying to find this stupid bucket. Then once you finally find the bucket to finish this quest, because some of these fish are rare, I at some points literally sat there hitting the E key for 20 minutes straight trying to find all of the fish. So the better way to do this would probably just be to slowly do it across an entire playthrough, but this fishing gameplay is some of the least interactive gameplay you'll have in this game. There's no moving. You literally can't even move your camera while you're fishing. You just hit E to start, and once you see the rod move, you hit E again. There's no gaming the system. There's no point where you should be like, okay, if I wait to this point will I get rarer fit? No. It's incredibly basic and just not that fun, and actually quite tedious in fact. Also, this quest in particular is just a flood of freaking notes. Neither of these quest givers can talk, so the way it typically would work would be they would call you back to them, or it'd be in the next stage of the quest where you return to them, and they'd be like, hey, I need your help. I put all the details in this note, except you probably do that 20 to 30 times across this entire fishing quest line. Most of these are incredibly basic quests, as I mentioned, just go here, hit E a bunch of times. And yeah, fishing was definitely not one of my favorite ones. It's kind of a cool feature to have in the background. You could also, of course, display these fish, get aquariums. Like on a survival playthrough, it's kind of cool. Some of the different fishing rods are kind of cool. But in general, as far as these actual quests to progress through all that content, it's not going to be the most enjoyable experience, or at least it wasn't for me. This definitely could be a lot cooler if the actual process of fishing had you do something. Like if you could move around the rod, or actually had some kind of skill component to catching better fish, making the odds of getting a rare fish higher based off something, not just hitting the E key. Then we have the contest, which compared to fishing, and I did this directly after fishing, is incredibly short. With this one, you find out 2 warriors were supremely confident they could take on a tough boss in Skyrim. So naturally, you follow in their footsteps and take on the boss for yourself. The boss is the web mother from the Elder Scrolls Blades, and functionally, it's a giant spider you're gonna have to fight. You find the 2 original warriors entombed in web behind the web mother, and you're actually able to claim their loot as a result of this. Half of this is going to be the Fists of Randagulf, which is an armor that boosts your melee and unarmed attacks and shield block. They look pretty cool. Definitely a unique design on some custom gauntlets you can get, and of course unique gauntlets in Skyrim. And on the other warrior, you will find the Ice Blade of the Monarch, which is going to deal frost damage and take some stamina. I actually like this one. I thought it was a cool quest overall. It's super simple, just 2 new weapons in Skyrim, but it was definitely a more fun way of getting those 2 items. The story of these 2 people and reading through the notes of how cocky they were that each of them could do it, and then fighting this one-off enemy you won't encounter anywhere else. Then we have Gallows Hall, which is kind of both a house mod as well as an experience mod, definitely more on the experience side for right now at least. Basically, you're going to go to Gallows Hall and quickly find yourself trapped within, featuring a puzzle with several steps for you to exit this room. It isn't the most obvious puzzle in the world, but not ridiculously difficult. There's definitely at least one point where I was completely confused in how to use Google/Discord, and a few custom or unique effects that'll pop up and things flying around. It overall was pretty memorable. I had fun doing this one. Obviously, I don't want to spoil the puzzle overall, but in the end, after completing the puzzle, you're left with a couple of things, a couple of which are actually really cool. First off, the Bloodworm Helm, as well as the Helm of Orin Bearclaw. So basically, skulls restructured to actually function as helmets in Skyrim. Both of those looking pretty cool, probably going to mesh really well with certain character builds out there. But then also the Staff of Worms. I think this is a really cool looking staff in its own right, and it will functionally allow you to revive deceased enemies to your side, which is always fun. Not a wholly original mechanic, but I definitely enjoyed using this, and I think the design is pretty original and interesting. But then you also actually get Gallows Hall itself as a player home. It has these spooky key mannequins which moved, and I'm not sure if this is a feature or a bug, but it's there. It does that, at least right now. It's not really your traditional player home. You kind of have this main room and then a bunch of stairs to a couple of additional rooms, and it's really not the most practical. Like, as an actual player home, I would rate this pretty lowly. It's also kind of dirty. There's a bunch of clutter all over this main room, which I imagine not everyone's going to like, as well as it's kind of large to actually traverse and run up and down these stairs consistently, although it does have a couple of cool features that other player homes won't. It has an altar to create your own black soul gems without actually having to use the soul cairn, which is pretty powerful. But even cooler, in the basement is the Bone Forge, which enables you to create a few different types of followers depending on what you place into it. These are just one-life followers. They'll follow you around until death in combat, and then you'll have to spawn or create another one. And creating these zombie/skelefied followers, in addition to having the staff and worms to raise the dead, makes it so you could really just sit back in combat. Overall, it's a fun one, but the player home definitely leaves a bit to be desired. I think in the future, some mods could improve this player home, even add in additional rooms, and then this would be way better. Has a lot of potential, but right now, I think the experience and the items are way more memorable than the player home itself. But then for a more functional and practical player home, we do have Bloodchill Manor. It's another Eleanor player home, which put simply is going to be a good thing. The way this one starts off is kind of odd. You're invited to a special dinner party. One thing leads to another, and you end up in a new place you could call home. This dinner party concept almost gave me Clue vibes at first, and I was super excited, but then you remember, oh, it's Creation Club, and there isn't actually any dialogue, so it couldn't be that cool, and it really wasn't that cool. Concept was cool, though. With the short quest aside, you're now in a very cool vampiric-styled player home. It's actually inside of a cavern somewhere in Skyrim. It's dimly lit and has all of the things you would want for a vampire playthrough. Several main rooms are connected by a big hallway, and really just features all of the various things you would expect it to have. Beautifully decorated bedrooms, a couple of workshops, a super big dining room with displays for everything you would want. Overall, it just kind of feels like a preference thing. Is this going to mesh really well with the build or design of your character on your current playthrough or your next playthrough? Then you'll probably use this. Otherwise, there's a bunch of other great options out there. But of course, it is a super high quality one, and I imagine a lot of people are going to be using this one, definitely even using it over some of the mod options out there. Then we have Bittercup, which actually was probably my favorite quest mod overall from all of this new Creation Club content. It'll start with you having to go to this fountain outside of Falkreath, and there you have three choices. You could ask for power, wealth, or ask for nothing. Depending on what you choose, you will get three completely different quests and three completely different rewards in the end. And this is a lock-in choice. It's not like you go back and redo one of the other quests. No, whatever you choose, you get that singular choice. I don't want to spoil everything, but the main gist is wealth will lead you on a quest to take out a rich guy, and you'll get some treasure. You have several choices along the way, though, on how you want to do this, or if you want to double-cross people. Power leads you into an arena where you'll have to fight against a bunch of different enemies to survive, and you'll end up with this new helmet as well as a sword to go along with it, each of those being very cool looking. And lastly, nothing involves you saving a man, which in the end you could end up getting a follower. And also, regardless of which way you go, you will get Bittercup as a reward. It's a one-time usable item that will increase the highest of stealth, magicka, or health by 20 points and decrease the lowest of the three by 20 points. So whichever was already the highest will be even higher, whichever was already the lowest will get even lower. But again, the quests and the experiences with this one were really memorable, and I feel like the rewards you got actually were quite substantial. Significant financial gain, a really cool sword and headpiece, or a very valuable follower. Funny enough, it was some of my favorite pieces of quest content, but a lot of you will probably pick one and never actually experience the other two. The Bow of Shadows is more of that traditional Creation Club content in that it's just a singular weapon with a short quest to get it. And of course, it is a weapon that appeared in previous Elder Scrolls games. Basically, there's an assassination attempt on the Jarl. The person trying to assassinate the Jarl is using the Bow of Shadows. You foil the assassination attempt and get the bow for yourself. The weapon itself has a special effect. Upon taking it out, you're granted invisibility for 30 seconds, and the weapon draw is 20% faster. So naturally, those two synergize super well. Pretty much the ultimate tool for a stealth archer, but a pretty simple one overall. The quest integration definitely felt nice, and I feel like the quest thematically made sense with theme of the weapon. Otherwise, it's just a unique weapon that if you're going for a stealth archer, which I'm sure many of you will at least consider or dabble in at some point, it's a great one to have in your arsenal. Redguard Elite Armaments. This one's almost similar to Ghost of the Tribunal, but on a much smaller scale. It's kind of a weapon/armor pack with a short quest to tie it all together. The gist of this one is you'll have to beat down some man in the middle of a town somewhere, and as he struggles back to consciousness, he is so impressed with his beatdown that he actually tries to recruit you. A short wait later, you'll be in contact with a Redguard spy network that is based in Skyrim, and they're known as the remnants. Except one of these spies has gone amiss and has in fact been taken by the Thalmor. The quest involves some recon work and finding out details on where this missing remnant is, but from there you'll have the actual task of rescuing the captured remnant with some help from some other members of the remnants overall. And after completing this, you're left with a full armor set as well as 2 new swords. One sword just goes with the armor set. It looks absolutely amazing. The armor set overall looks absolutely amazing. I'd put this right up there with the top tier armors featured in this Creation Club batch overall. I think I personally just really love the design of all of this here. But then also there is Bone Shaver. This is actually held by one of the Thalmor warriors that is protecting that hostage on the rescue mission. It's very easy to miss this, especially because you could just kind of run around and save the hostage and never even fight him. So make sure you actually loot this. It's going to cause attacks to deal extra bleeding damage, and just I think overall this is a pretty solid one. I think this armor set looks amazing. The quest was simple but to the point, and it did kind of feel like you were doing something. I was gaining the trust of these new spies in this area, and as a result they gave me a set of armor, which seems plausible, and the bonus unique weapon is just a nice cherry on top. Headman's Cleaver is a super simple one. This feels very much in the style of that old school Creation Club content that just wasn't as good as the modern standard they've kind of raised to. A rich person writes a note saying they lost a weapon, a group of bandits stole it. She wants you to go get it. She doesn't actually want it back, she just doesn't want those bandits to have it. You go to a dungeon, you take out bandits, one of the bandits has this cleaver, and now it's yours. Very simple, very basic. It's a unique cleaver that you can fight enemies with. For me, it honestly isn't even the coolest looking weapon, doesn't have any special effects or anything, just a quick cleaver quest basically. Easily one of the most forgettable ones in this batch overall. On the complete opposite side though, we do have Goldbrand, which is a singular weapon, but I think has a really memorable quest, and it leaves you with a cool weapon. You find a body somewhere attempting to gain access to an ancient warrior's tomb. It takes us to a few different locations, some of which involve fighting some enemies to gain the exact items which are needed to gain entry to this tomb. And you'll even have to fend off against some cult members who are also interested during this. It's not really a huge story quest per se, but it was fun and it felt a bit more substantial. Like I was really trying to break into someone's tomb, and when you finally do, you get this special sword with Goldbrand. Visually, it's quite boring, probably one of the most boring unique weapons added in with all of this content, but it does set enemies on fire and it deals bonus damage to enemies who are on fire, so it can be pretty fun to use, definitely pretty powerful in many situations. And the reason I think I enjoyed this one so much more was that whole Tomb Raider-esque feeling. You had to do a few tasks first before you actually got the reward. It really felt like you were breaking into something, getting the supplies needed, and all of that build-up and the things you had to do beforehand made that reward in the end feel a lot more substantial and special. Staves is super simple, no quests or anything. It's just going to add in several of the staffs to appear in Morrowind into Skyrim. These are just going to pop up in the world, or you can go here specifically and he will sell most of these unenchanted and enchanted. And really, these are just one-to-one recreations. They look exactly like they did in Morrowind, just modernized into Skyrim. And for some people, you're going to really enjoy that. I like this one, not because I'm probably going to use each of these or even tend to use staffs during a playthrough, but because it is quite nice to have this as background content. If you do choose to do this, or if an enemy is wielding a stave of some kind, there's a much larger pool to pick from, and it really fleshes out the staff diversity in Skyrim by quite a bit. In a similar vein, Necromantic Grimoire is basically like this full-fledged necromancer toolkit. It's going to add in a bunch of different necromancy themed spells and integrate them just throughout the world, on some bosses, and even for purchase from certain people. Whether you like the dark arts or just standing by while your spawn destroys an entire town for you, this is a fun one. Naturally, as you can imagine, the vast majority of these spells do involve you conjuring something. There's a full set of skeleton warriors of several different types you can spawn, which yeah, it's nice, especially early on, but let's be honest, that's pretty boring. Much more fun are things like the Ancient Death Priest or the Bone Colossus, two immensely powerful spawns that will do some serious damage for you. The Bone Colossus in particular is just awesome and a lot of fun. He can actually stomp down enemies entirely. He could use shouts to keep enemies at bay or just punch them. And although that's kind of the core aspect of this, having different spawns that will fight for you, there's also a bunch of kind of supporting spells, which is pretty cool. And it makes this all synergize really well. Necromancer Ritual will make it so when one of your spawns die, you'll actually gain magicka and health. There's a spell where you can sacrifice a conjured spirit to split it into 2 sundred spirits instead. So you can conjure one thing and then actually split that into 2 sundred spirits. You can just banish all of the undead spawns around you, which can be super powerful. The Haunted Spirit will make it so when it's killed, it takes 10 points of a skill that the person that killed it has and will actually transfer it to you. So if that thing dies, you just get stronger. It's another one where there's definitely mods doing this type of thing way better and adding in way more content in this category, but that doesn't inherently make this bad. said, it's still a fun one, and it's nice to have this in the base game now. It definitely fleshes out this aspect of Skyrim way more and gives you quite a few additional options here, and it's just going to be spread out throughout the world. You'll find this stuff naturally as you're playing, and also does have this set of robes, which is nice, although a very small touch. Fearsome Fists is a pretty interesting one. What it's going to do is add 15 new types of gauntlets into Skyrim. Just like with Necromantic Grimoire, there is no set quest or anything. These are just going to be scattered into the world, and one of the very unique things about these gauntlets that you'll probably notice pretty quickly as you're looking at them is they are going to augment your unarmed stats, specifically with giant spikes attached to them. And balance-wise, the way this will work is it'll kind of peak out at 20 bonus damage, so 20 additional damage per strike, and in the lower tier you're dealing with more like 8 bonus damage, and as you kind of go up one armor type, you'll increase in intervals of 2 bonus damage each. Now this is an interesting one in that, is it practical? Realistically, in the mid to late game, once you're actually speccing into a skill tree, especially some of the modded skill trees, you'll deal more damage with your weapon of choice. There's no unarmed skill tree. There are a few unarmed skills, but no dedicated tree. But in the early game, these definitely provide a nice bonus, plus they're not actually a weapon. They're technically just gauntlets, so you will always have them. If you just happen to get into a fist match in Skyrim, you're going to have a bunch of bonus damage coming from them. And even further, since they're gauntlets, some of these look really cool. It's not always super obvious, but with some, having those giant spikes coming out of your arms or forearms more specifically just adds a lot to the character overall. There's definitely going to be a point where if you're using iron armor, you'll probably rather have these cool spiked iron gauntlets than the traditional ones. So I like this one. I don't know of a mod that does anything similar, not anything quite on the same scale, and I feel like it's a nice background feature to have in Skyrim. Even if it's not necessarily the most overpowered thing, you're not even going to build into it, it's nice to have these in the world, like I said with some of the other ones. But with Fearsome Fists in particular, I think it's nice because it does add in something a bit different. It kind of is adding in an additional feature or more of a practical way to spec into unarmed early on. I tried like 4 times to pronounce this, it's not happening, so that's the name. It's a new dwarven player home in Skyrim, but with a twist. You bought a fixer-upper, or technically you didn't buy anything because you get it for free. It's going to kick off with a short quest that follows in the footsteps of some others looking to gain access to this location. We pick up that mantle and arrive at the location with a bit of bandit resistance, but from there you're going to have access to the player home itself and more importantly its manufactory. Because you see, even though technically right off the bat you just gain this home, it's actually quite decrepit. There's cobwebs, subpar amenities, etc. And underground the home is a full-fledged dwarven manufactory that after following some quests you're actually going to bring the manufactory up to working order and spawn a few robots so they can fix your home. It's a pretty quick and simple quest with you just getting some items, putting it into a machine, and then a dwarven bot popping out to fix stuff. And then this dwarven bot will go room by room and repopulate things. You have to do 3 rooms in total. And from there you have this massive home. It's almost more of an estate if I'm being honest. This place is pretty large. The biggest player home I cover in this video by far. It has all the things you kind of would want or expect. You could maybe ask for a bit more as far as the displays and kind of your armory or display room. Although on the flip side, it does have a giant throne room if you really want to feel like a king in Skyrim. And although that's all cool and the player home is like fine, it looks fine. On paper, I would never use this, and I actually think it's by far the worst player home I cover in this video, mainly because it's just incredibly impractical and lonely. You're in this massive player home, and even though there's this dwarven manufactory with little bots rolling around it underground, you don't actually have anyone in your home. I just assumed some of those robots would come up with me and kind of live with me as little helpers, but no, they don't actually do that. But even the furnishings felt a bit off. If you compare this one to like Bloodchill Manor, it feels like the shelves are way lighter, not nearly as much just populating the area, and it feels empty, lonely, and when you actually want to get here, you have to fast travel to the outside cavern, run through the cavern, go through a load screen, and then you also have a giant house you have to run through. So it could take you a decent amount of time, especially with that load screen. You technically also do have the manufactory completely under you, but there's no further gameplay mechanics with that. So overall, one that could have been really interesting, but was actually just quite disappointing. And then last but not least, we do have alternate armors. 8 of the 26 new creations here are alternate armors, and basically what these are armors that were created for the Elder Scrolls Blades and have now been ported into Skyrim. These are all pretty simple, them just being a full armor set. 2 of them are not actually full armor sets and only have 2 pieces of armor total. And although the armors themselves are super simple, it is literally just an armor from the Elder Scrolls Blades, they surprisingly all have a quest to get them. And I'm not going through every quest here, but you'll do a bunch of miscellaneous things, whether it be finding the armor on a body somewhere or even just fighting somebody wearing the armor and then getting it that way. Overall, some of these armors look really good. Some are just not my favorite. I would use a alternate armor or vanilla armor instead. And something that is both a pro and a con depending depending on where you're sitting, is these aren't integrated into the leveled list. So if you find one of these, it's a unique armor. It's just for you. I feel like a mod in the future integrating them into the leveled list would be kind of cool, but at the same time, for some, it is nice to have this one standalone special armor for yourself. And for me at least, I think the silver armor in particular actually looks really cool with this one. So looking at Anniversary Edition overall, and really here we're hyper focusing on the new content, but the content in general, to me, there's definitely $20 worth of content here. Now, that comes with a couple of asterisks. On one hand, is this the best content? Is there better alternatives out there? Yes, mods and many of these situations are going to be better, especially on just the voice acting front. Mod voice acting is kind of a meme at this point, but there are some really well voiced mods in the Skyrim modding community, and I would argue even mediocre voice acting is typically going to be better than reading like 30 notes while trying to fish. But that's not to say a lot of this anniversary content isn't also going to be very fun. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing mods actually use some of it in the future and even enhance some of it in the future. For me personally, I genuinely think farming was one of my favorite things. It is probably my favorite player home mod. I don't know if I've played ever, but definitely up there. It was a lot of fun just as kind of a background asset. And overall, I don't really think this is doing anything game changing with Skyrim. It is a DLC or expansion amount of content in a way, but the game's gonna still feel pretty familiar. But it does add in a nice coating of just additional things to do, additional weapons to get or buy or find, spells, quests, player homes, etc. It really does add in a wealth of stuff into this world, and in particular, if you're somebody like on PlayStation, this is definitely easy to recommend if you don't have the alternate of a bunch of great free mods doing things similar. With that said, obviously, if you are somebody super invested in the modding scene, then this is going to be less appealing to you. At the same time, this also had issues with the breaking mods for some people, update issues in general, so I understand why some are not going to purchase this, but at least for me, again, I feel like I got my $20 worth while playing Skyrim Anniversary Edition with some highs and some not so highs. With that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative. As always, again, I thank you all for watching, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.